Hey guys, so I know it's been a while since I recorded my last video, so I wanted to kind of update you all on the progress of my journey towards a diagnosis. Um, so, the last time that I went to my neurologist, she recommended that I see a new specialist they had hired from Johns Hopkins. So I met with him a couple of weeks ago, and he wasn't particularly helpful. He just said it wasn't cerebellar ataxia, it didn't present like it. And then he kind of made a subtle but not so subtle implication that, I may have had a history of childhood trauma that was predisposing me towards having these symptoms. So, all in all, it was a very, very frustrating conversation. I left the office and I was pretty much in tears. And I thought, I'm really coming to dread these visits every 6 months. Um, But at the same time, my tests were still abnormal. I had a lot more trouble with finger to nose um, when he tested that, and tremor at the end of the range of movement, which is consistent with MS, period. Um, so my symptoms have continued to progress. In May, I started to have bilateral foot drop, much, much more noticeable on slopes. So we went to Costa Rica over the summer, and we had a very long hill to climb, and I had a great deal of trouble. I had to pull out my folding cane that I carry everywhere, and even with the cane, from a nursing perspective, I was pretty much maximum assist with the cane. I had a lot of trouble. It was a very long, very steep hill. So, those symptoms have continued to progress, and so it's been very frustrating. What I didn't realize was at the same time, over the last 7 years, my sister has been having many of the same symptoms except for the mobility issues. She's been having altered sensation on one side, she's been having hand weakness, and these were prompting her to look for a diagnosis on her own. They had diagnosed her with fibromyalgia and lupus, which both my mother and she have been diagnosed with. But she wasn't satisfied with that, and it didn't seem to fit. So she had reached out to me about a month ago and said, hey, I think you should look into Ahlers Downloa syndrome. And I dismissed it. I said, no, that's hypermobility, and I don't have those symptoms. I have musculoskeletal problems and movement problems. And then for whatever reason, I started to Google ataxia and EDS, and I pulled up all this literature, medical literature on it. And I went back and read the classifications again. And they have a test that you can take for one of the criteria, which is generalized joint hypermobility. It's a score of 9. I scored a 7. And then I started looking even more closely at the other characteristics of it. And I found that I had a number of the skin characteristics and other minor characteristics of it as well, and actually met the criteria according to the 2017 classification of EDS. I met the criteria for hypermobility type, also had some of the signs of, also technically could meet the criteria for classical type. And then interestingly, we have a family history of spontaneous bowel rupture in our one generation above me, and I have a sudden cardiac death two sudden cardiac deaths in the family in males at the age of 60. That put us in potential range of a vascular subtype of EDS, which is the rarest and most lethal. So my sister had already gone for her genetic testing at Stanford. We're waiting for the results, and I have my test with the geneticist last week. How does this come to bear on mobility, you ask? I ask the same thing. So EDS is related to defects in the genes responsible for the production of collagen, which basically is everywhere in your body. It's what holds your body together. Different gene defects result in different subtypes. And one of those things is that the collagen in your body in general for all types is not quite what it needs to be. And that can lead to degenerative back problems. It can lead to orthopedic issues. It can cause your ankles to wobble. It can cause your knees to be loose. And in my case, it could possibly very strongly relate to cervical instability, because I do have some subluxation that would result in tremors and would result in weakness and neuropathy, altered sensation, and a number of other things that basically were also attributable potentially to primary progressive MS. So it's interesting because Ehlers Downloa syndrome is, I think, I've seen the rates of diagnosis vary. 1 in 200,000 seems to be the rate of diagnosis, so it's very rare. They do feel that it's very underdiagnosed. People either die from it or go their whole lives with multiple diagnoses without doing the genetic test that's available. They think the prevalence may be as high as 1 in 50,000. So if, there's a saying in medical school that if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Think of the most common cause, not the rarest cause. So in this instance, PPMS would be the horse. Ehlers-Danlos syndrome would definitely be the zebra. But interestingly, when I told my primary care provider that my sister had gotten tested for this, her immediate response was, and I told her our family history, and her immediate response was, we need to get you over to genetics so that you can be tested, and I hope you find some answers. And honestly, it was the first conversation I've had with my primary care provider where I didn't feel as though she thought it was in my head. So next week is my genetics test, and hopefully next week we'll have the response of my sister's test. EDS, the various types of defects are transmitted in different ways. The types that they tested her for were classical EDS, hypermobility type EDS, and vascular EDS. So generally, if she doesn't have the gene that's been identified for classical or vascular, she probably meets the diagnostic criteria for hypermobility type. They haven't yet identified the gene for that, or genes. So that's most likely what I'll be tested for as well. So I didn't post for a while. It was just too depressing to go into the provider's office and just keep getting this sort of blank look. But this really is a systemic disease. It's related to all different types of autoimmune issues. It's related to orthopedic issues, neurological issues, just a whole bunch, vascular issues, skin issues, just a whole bunch of stuff. And so when you're dealing with specialists that only look at one part of the animal, it's very, very hard to get this sort of looked at. So if you're having symptoms of MS and you're looking for answers, I would encourage that you check out the criteria for Ehlers Downloa syndrome. You can also reach out to me and I can forward you the 2017 classification of syndromes that just got published this year. So if you leave me a comment in the comments box with your email, I will email it to you. But this is all about a search for answers in a very complex medical system. And there is a higher incidence of there is a higher incidence of MS in EDS patients as well. So go figure. Hopefully it's just one and not both. But regardless, this is about the search for answers and about the frustrations and challenges of getting those answers in our medical system. So keep leaving me your comments because I do like reading it. It reminds me that I'm not alone in this, and it's not fun for any of us. But I definitely think we have to be our own advocates. And I always say that, and I encourage you to keep doing that and keep pushing. And I will keep pushing too, reading your comments. All right, guys, take care. I'll let you know once I hear something.